Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the 77th UN General Assembly. I'm Daniel Che. The 77th UN General Assembly kicked off on the September 13th, and one of the highlights of the event, the general debate, is on. Every year, leaders of more than 190 member nations take part and take turns to deliver their message at the podium. This will be the first such an event for Yoon Suk-yeol, who began his term this year for South Korea as the president. Now, let's check in with our editor-in-chief, Moon Gun-young. She joins us live from the UN headquarters in New York, where the 77th General Assembly is held. The debate is underway as we speak. Gun-young, what can you tell us about the gathering this year?
Daniel, so world leaders have begun arriving here in Manhattan for the 77th United Nations General Assembly General Debate, the first entirely in-person gathering of this kind in about 3 years' time, so since the onset of the pandemic. Heads of state, heads of governments, and top diplomats from all over the world are attending the gathering this year. Now, as for the mood in and around the UN headquarters here in New York City, what I can tell you is that a lot more roads are blocked compared to the previous periods, and there are a lot more restrictions in place. But that's hardly the only factor that differentiates this year's gathering from previous ones. The pandemic disrupted the past 2 years' UNGA meetings, but this year, diplomats are getting back to their normal routine of meeting in person on the margins of the UN Assembly, which some jokingly call diplomatic speed dating. Also, planners had to do some last-minute rearranging to accommodate the schedule of President Biden and other world leaders attending the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II in London on Monday. So U.S. President Joe Biden, who normally the leader of a country which is one of the first speakers in line to set the agenda, he'll be speaking tomorrow on the second day of the general debate. Now, all but one head of state will be present here at the UN headquarters to address the General Assembly, and that's Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who will be addressing the crowd virtually.
Right there, Gun-young, and South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol is there in New York to address the General Assembly this year. Do you have any idea on what his message may be? Will North Korea take up a portion of his speech?
So this is President Yoon Suk-yeol's official debut on the United Nations stage as he takes the podium as the president of South Korea for the very first time. Back to your question, Daniel. What I'm learning from his top aides traveling with him here is that his speech will not be centered on North Korea this time. Rather, keeping in line with the motto of this year's General Assembly, a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges, President Yoon will be proposing a set of solutions for the interlocking challenges that we face today that require the solidarity of nations that share the same values. So we'll have to wait and see what his speech will be all about. Daniel.
All right, Gun-young, thank you for that report. Now we're going to have to go straight to the scene right now because the arrangements are being made, and we have President Yoon Suk-yeol stepping up to the podium to deliver the address.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Yoon Suk-yeol, President of the Republic of Korea, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, I offer my sincere congratulations to His Excellency Mr. Chava Karosi for assuming the presidency of the UNGA. I hope that the 77th session of the UNGA, under your leadership, will bring together the wisdom of each member states so as to shape a better world. I also express my deepest respect to Mr. Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his tireless devotion as he embarks on his second term. Under the United Nations Charter, we are called upon to endeavor to promote social progress and better standards of life, enlarge freedom, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace as well as security.
한 국가 내에서
When freedom of any individual in a nation comes under threat, members of the community must join hands to remove the threat and defend freedom. Likewise, when freedom of any citizen or nation in the global community is in peril, it is the community of nations that must stand together in solidarity to defend that freedom.
우리들의 현대사는
Our modern history testifies to the process of our solidarity and unity in safeguarding freedom and pushing our civilization forward. Today, the global community is yet again witnessing freedom and peace of its citizens put in jeopardy. Attempts to alter the status quo by force endangers the lives of innocent people. Nuclear weapons and other weapons of WMD pose increasing threats to humanity. Systematic violations of human rights leave millions of children deprived of their future. Such threats to freedom and peace must be overcome through solidarity and fearless commitment to the framework of universal global norms consolidated over the years within the UN system. The theme of the UN General Assembly session this year, the watershed moment, encapsulates the gravity of the global crisis confronting us, which underscores the solemn role of the UN. The first step in our journey to seek solution that will help us through these turbulent times to find answers begins with solidarity and deference to the universally accepted global norms, working together throughout the UN system, which has been established over the past decades. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, honorable delegates, as humanity strives to defend freedom and build lasting peace, the UN's role is indispensable. Genuine freedom is not just being free from the shackles, but having opportunities to live life to the fullest with dignity. Genuine peace is not an absence of war, but removing conflict and hostility that hold back shared progress of humanity and building the foundation for greater prosperity. Genuine freedom and peace can turn into reality when we are free from disease and hunger, free from illiteracy, and free from want of energy and culture. In this regard, the United Nations has been exerting great endeavors through the UN ECOSOC and UNESCO, among others, yet is now urged to take on a broader role and responsibility. To tackle the challenges brought on by the pandemic, the UN must play a central role in bringing the community of nations together to decisively step up their support for countries with limited fiscal space and technical expertise. In pursuit of the global agenda for decarbonization, countries with leading green technologies must work to unsparingly share new and renewable energy technologies with others around the world. In the era of digital sophistication in particular, one of the most urgent tasks for the global community and the UN is promoting global cooperation to narrow the digital divide, which exacerbates polarization between nations. Countries standing at the forefront of digital innovation must offer broader assistance for digital education, technology transfer, and investment, while the UN must redouble its efforts to mobilize support to that end. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, and distinguished delegates, the Republic of Korea, notwithstanding the recent fiscal consolidation, scaled up support for those who are in need with resources secured through expenditure restructuring. At home, we are offering more assistance to socially vulnerable groups, and abroad, we increased our ODA budget. Just as broadening support for the socially disadvantaged groups lays the groundwork for sustainable prosperity, support for nations of the world facing challenges will render global freedom and peace more sustainable. As a responsible member of the international community, Korea is committed to playing its due responsibility and role for the freedom of global citizens and prosperity of the global community. Korea has accelerated research and development for COVID-19 therapeutics and vaccines, pledging $300 million towards the Act A initiative and $30 million to the Financial Intermediary Fund of the World Bank, among others, thereby expanding its contribution to building a more robust global health architecture. To ensure a more effective response to future infectious disease outbreaks, Korea will host a ministerial meeting of the Global Health Security Agenda in Seoul this November. Moreover, Korea will remarkably increase its contribution to the Global Fund, joining forces with our partners around the world in our fight against infectious diseases including AIDS, tuberculosis, as well as malaria. And turning to the issue of climate change, Korea will scale up its green ODA, help developing countries transition to a low-carbon future, and share its innovative green technologies with the entire humanity around the world. Over the years, Korea has been transferring and sharing its e-government digital technology with developing countries and many others. The Republic of Korea is now pushing forward with its plan to transform the government into a digital platform government. It is an ambitious initiative to remarkably upgrade our democracy, public service, as well as welfare through digital technology. We will continue to more widely share our advanced digital technology and data and spare no effort in providing support and in investing in education. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, as we seek answers to the global crisis we are faced with, the viability of the UN system and the universal global norms architecture is now under test. The crisis confronting us will only be resolved when we stand firmly in solidarity to share the universal values of freedom and work together to uphold and spread our freedom. And in this vein, we must more firmly support the system of the UN, anchored in a spirit of freedom and solidarity, as well as the normative frameworks that have thus been universally recognized in the international community. Any attempt to turn away from the UN system and universal norms will divide the global community into blocks, further compounding the crisis and turmoil. We must more rigorously identify the nature and the roots of the problems that lie before us. The international community must vigorously endeavor to share responsibility and duties and join whenever necessary forces to resolve the challenges we face. Once again, I call upon global citizens and leaders of the world for their resolute and enduring support for the UN system and universal global norms as we seek answers in this watershed moment. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, the very first mission of the United Nations after its founding was to approve the Republic of Korea as the sole legitimate government on the Korean Peninsula and to defend the freedom of my country by sending over UN forces during the Korean War. Thanks to such efforts by the United Nations, Korea was able to become what it is today. As such, the Republic of Korea will protect and expand the freedom of global citizens, and together with the UN, we will fulfill our responsibilities to promote peace and prosperity around the world. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Korea for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort his...
And that was President Yoon Suk-yeol at the 77th UN General Assembly with his maiden speech there. We have in the studio joined by An Jun-sung, visiting professor of Yonsei University Graduate School of International Studies with us. And Professor, thank you so much for making time for us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, first of all, there was an historic point in his presidency for Yoon Suk-yeol, and what can we take away from this particular speech?
Yeah, it should be, perhaps we should start with the title of his speech, basically the freedom and then solidarity, right? And it's interesting, when I listened to his speech, something struck me, right? So I said, oh, it sounds very familiar. So I went back to his inauguration speech, actually, where he used some keywords several times. For example, he repeated the term freedom 35 times, and also the solidarity is 8 times. I think it's about 6 times, something. Right, and then for his UN speech also, I looked it up and then see that he repeated used the freedom again, right? 21 times, right? And then also the solidarity 8 times. So I guess that his idea is about the same with his inauguration speech, basically doing that, securing the international freedom, right? And then, solidarity, and, using the UN system. I guess that's the idea he's trying to, message he's trying to, deliver.
So there's consistency from the point in time when he started his work at the top office. If you were to read a little bit deeper into them, how would you read between the lines, especially the key words that you pointed out for us just now?
It's very interesting. I look at it when the speech was, there's 2 keywords, let's say, freedom and solidarity. But if I use, looking at the key phrases, I think there's 2 key phrases he repeated using. First one was very similar to the keyword, right? Freedom and peace. He used it 5 times, right? Obviously, international peace and freedom is very significant to the United Nations. And second thing was that he also used that the UN system and the international, rule system, the system, right? In terms of, it's also repeated 5 times. So I guess looking at the keyword and key phrases, I think the message he tried to main message is that try to obtain the international peace, freedom and peace using the UN system. I guess really the idea he tried to convey. Yeah.
Right, 2 key words that are deeply ingrained in the UN system and how it can be used to promote peace and prosperity across the globe. He emphasized international cooperation in dealing with various issues, of course. What are some of the key areas that Korea will be focused on in that respect?
Yeah, I look at that one. I think he mentioned about 5 issues and the key areas he, focused on specific issues. For example, mostly I think 3 of them I think is about the COVID-19 pandemic situation, how Korea can help about, for example, the R&D investment on the COVID-19 vaccine, and also that how to help other countries using the global health problems, right? Also, I think he talked about the green ODA, which means that focus on the something new technology, not based on carbon. It's non-carbon technology stuff. So it's more like climate change issues. Also, I think the last things he mentioned is about the e-government, sharing the e-government experience, the Korean experience with the other countries, and then in a way to upgrade into the digital government platform. I think that's the things he kind of emphasize it, shared in our experience and knowledge with other countries.
Arguably the biggest issue right now for the world is, of course, the Ukraine crisis, but it was touched on, but somewhat indirectly.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised too. I mean, I was expecting a little bit more, but direct, more clear, but I guess more like they kind of they decide on not to touch on too much on it, and there's first his debut also, right? So I guess maybe he's not getting to, maybe he don't want to get into too fierce say discussion with other countries, and then according to their system, right? It's general debate, and some other country can make rebut any criticism raised during the General Assembly meeting. So basically, for example, if they talk about the Russian situation, criticize the invasion to the Ukraine, maybe the Russian can say I respond to the Korean, right? Something. So I guess maybe the first debut maybe try to get nicely and friendly, I guess in the beginning.
Right. Takeoff is important. Don't want to create too much turbulence along the way. And of course, what makes Yoon's speech for the South Korean president is that it may be a little different compared to his predecessors. Would you point out some of the aspects in that respect for President Yoon Suk-yeol, the way he addressed the UN General Assembly, perhaps even the duration or the way he touched on certain topics, or how he tried to swerve around certain topics that could be too sensitive for certain countries?
Yeah, one thing impression was that it seems it looks like he tried not to touch on some sensitive issues, I guess, intentionally. More like the foreign policy, case like the strategic ambiguities, something trying not to be too deep into some sensitive issues, which may be not significant to the Korean, the government, national interest. I guess that. But however, surprisingly, I was expecting something about the North Korean issue, about there's a nuclear test going on, and then they changed a lot of law, right? So try to provoke the South Korean government too, right? So I was thinking that they might put something more details on how North Korea, their attitudes, but I guess they make decision not to talk about it. I mean, not only Ukraine, but Ukraine is not really direct threat to the Korean national security. It's a threat to the international community, but not directed to Korean government, right? But the North Korean issue is really directed to the Korean government. Right, so I guess that I was wondering. I mean, and plus, I guess that the South Korean government tried to, administration tried to, improve their relation, I guess, to North Korea, because that I guess they will do something better, improve the relation. I guess to try not to too much sensitive on it, right? Right,
giving them space and room to consider their next move, and in that sense. What does this imply in terms of the future policies for the current administration in terms of North Korea policy, with the sensitive topics or issues not being highlighted at the global stage at the UN General Assembly?
Actually, that's a very interesting question, because my impression about the Yoon administration when he had a campaign, election campaign, I think he was very tough on North Korean policy, especially North Korean issue. How do about a lot of issues, how we defense issues, national defense. But that's why many people, including me, was expecting that he's gonna put some taking firm position on how North Korean nuclear issues something, but surprisingly, to my surprise, I mean, frankly, and he didn't put anything. So I guess that perhaps they're doing something negotiating with North Korean government at this moment, perhaps, right? So maybe try to not to steer anything unnecessary tie. I mean, just try to be, calm and try to move on some, develop improve the relations with North Korea. Maybe they try not to do it. Perhaps they're doing something, under the table, I guess.
Again, benefit of the doubt and clean slate every time we start talks with North Korea, hopefully. North Korea, of course, will have their turn at the podium. What has the regime's mood been towards current South Korean administration so far, and what will be the possible changes we could see, or would there be more of the same?
Yeah, well, interesting question. I ask myself, is it what are doing, right? I mean, the things that I guess they kind of confused, I think, because that even the way the South Korean government talking, the way they approach is different from the previous administrations, right? Obviously, and then when they at the beginning of the new administration, I guess that they thought there was a firm standoff between the North and South, right? But the way you see that recently, I think that the administration suggests family reunion, right? Kind of family meeting between North and South. Surprisingly, Korean War is 1950 and ended at 53, and if you born there at that time, about that time, you were like 80 something, over 80 something, right? Someone who have any vivid, any memory about what their childhood maybe should be at least over 80. So I just wondering how many people actually can get there, get a reunion with the family between North and South. And surprising to me that North Korea actually took it very nicely. Oh yeah, let's do it. I was a little bit surprised about their actions. So I thought they would say no, we're not going to do anything. You're not going to talk to you anymore. But something like they took very nicely, and it's more like they were waiting for something. I guess they catch it.
Well, a lot of interactions and sit-downs can be expected where various world leaders are gathered for the UN event, namely for President Yoon with the U.S. and Japan. What are some of the major sideline events can we expect for the South Korean leader during his stay in New York?
What I'm expecting at most is a bilateral between the President Yoon and then the President Biden, because of the the inflation reduction.
The IRA,
that's
right.
really struck the Korean, not only the government or the public, get outraged here about it. That was because we saw them when he visited Korea very nicely. Please invest in the U.S. We'll help you to whatever you need it. And then we saw everybody looking at the news, and suddenly it turned out to be that well, it's not necessarily true because what happened. But well, from my personal view, I guess that maybe President Biden has his own concern, right? Because he got election coming up, and then his approval rate is not really, really not exciting. So it's kind of lower than what he's hoped for. So I guess that he tried to do some boost, his popularity, some things, so approval rate as well. So I guess that he will try to do best for their national interest, which is not consistent with, I will say, their ally, one of the close allied, Korea. So I guess that's thing they will have a lot of things to talk. I was wondering what kind of thing they're talking about, because that, I'm sure that even the Washington, I understand that, see that the very strong feeling against the IRA. So I guess that's the things very interesting to see how the two leaders have talked about the issues and, some come up with some, I don't know, some solutions or some suggestions. Well, very interesting to see what happens there.
Aside from North Korea policy, another shift in policy or diplomacy for South Korea under the new administration is the Seoul-Tokyo relations. There are expectations that talks could happen between the two leaders. How would you view the current administration's approach to this bilateral relationship and some of the issues that have been piling up over the years?
It's very interesting. I was asking myself, what's going on between Tokyo and Seoul, right? It's like, I'm surprising that, I think it's happened a few times already. I mean, very short, relatively short time. But somehow the things I've noticed that between between two countries, what happened was that I think they have communication issues, because that, obviously what happened, we see according to the press, and the South Korean government say we'll have the bilateral meeting between two leaders, and Japanese foreign minister say no, minister says, oh no, they doubt and deny it. So it's like, but it's not common. You get a diplomat, right? It's the diplomatic issues, and you don't really rebut the other leader or the other government say something unless you have very strong things to say. So it means that I was this time same thing, right? They say South Korean government will have it, and happened before. So I was like, what's going on here? So I think that from my personal view, both leaders really want bilateral meeting for political reasons. But the problem was that they have to save their faces, right? So before that, they need to get some some build-up, political build-up, so they can say they have to justify why they have to meet them. But they have other concern, right? Domestic issues, and both leaders having very relatively low approval rate as well. So they're struggling with the approval rate as well. So they needed a breakthrough, and I'm sure they're both leaders really want to have the meeting. But problem is that the more like procedural things, I guess, something political view, how they how people probably will look at the leaders, the summit. More different perspectives, I guess.
So there's been a failure to communicate in setting up the communication lines between the leaders and, of course, other officials. Let's take a look at it from Japan's perspective. How are they responding to this, I suppose, a change in the administration and the change in their approach to dealing with Japan in terms of bilateral ties compared to the previous administration?
Yeah, but I guess what happened was very serious, because maybe if people go back to like former President Roh Moo-hyun at that time, it was very nice relations, and they even talk about Korea-Japan FTA because they want to have a really stronger economic tie. Both countries wanted the time, at least, right? But now it's like they don't even want to talk to it. I think that's a really problem. It's like, and then the way we're looking at it is that I think they both leaders having their some issues in domestic politics, right? They have some other issues. Both, even the former Prime Minister of Japan also had a problem with internal problem, and then they try to do, justify whatever they want to do it. And then you see that in some Japan, there's some group have a very strong, different view from what happened, what they have to do about, the forced labor issues, also, the Japan issues, a lot of historical issues behind. And then some group of the, Japan do not agree with what most Korean people think about it. So I guess that's things that, and there's, I guess the, Prime Minister, Japanese Prime Minister, also concerned about his, political, the backup and some plans. So I guess that's the issues they have to deal with it. So I guess they will talk sooner or later, I guess. But the problem is that how can you, justify it, from both sides? I guess that's.
Since we're always talking about approval ratings for the presidents, how would you rate the performance, or rather the message that's delivered by President Yoon Suk-yeol? We cannot emphasize enough the significance of today's event. So did President Yoon deliver what's expected of him and perhaps went even further than that distance with this UN speech?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier today, I mean, like, I was expecting more specific, but it wasn't really specific about, and he didn't mention any country names, right, obviously, and surprisingly, not even North Korea was specific. So I guess, well, he made a decision, I guess, his administration made a decision not to talk about specific country. Yeah, understandable, but I think that it could have been much more specific on issues and show more specific plan what the Korea as the member of United Nations to do for the international community. I mean, well, yeah, I guess, yeah, and then we can speak out, we can have our voice, talk about. That's what general, debate means. You can have a debate, right? You can talk about issues, raise the issues, topic, anything you think is right, and then some other member can say rebut it if they have a chance to do it, right? So I guess, yeah, I was expecting, right, some more specific things, but well, it wasn't. So I guess a little bit, and then also about North Korean issue, a little bit curious why they didn't talk about North Korea. Traditionally, I mean, it's a very common topic, and they always talk about issues, denuclearization of North Korea and, peace and prosper, right, in the Korean Peninsula, right? So.
Right. Doesn't want to throw anything into the ice or fire. A gentle approach seems to be the strategy for President Yoon Suk-yeol this time at the UN General Assembly. It looks like we have to wrap things up here. Professor An Jun-sung, thank you so much for being here with us at this very inconvenient hour.
My pleasure. No problem.
Appreciate it. And now that wraps up our special edition of Arirang News. Thank you so much for staying with us.